Pop Shield, a long-form discussion podcast about musical topics both past and present. I'm Gabe, and I'm joined as always by Dan.
Hello.
And Darren.
Hello.
So Dan, after our last episode, you made me realize that Valentine's Day was coming up soon, and that what you want is to discuss My Bloody Valentine's Loveless. I only said, I'm worried our analysis will be only shallow unless we approach this classic LP in another way, like trying to rank every song, to which you replied, if this and yes.
God.
Okay.
Is that what you said?
Sorry. Yeah, exactly that, verbatim. All right, I had some trouble coming up with an intro, but we are indeed about to dive deep into every track on My Bloody Valentine's 1991 uber classic, Loveless. And just to make things a little bit harder on ourselves, we're going to attempt to rank these 11 perfect songs. I got to say, this was very, very difficult. I was making major changes like 30 minutes ago to my list. But before we get started, I want to hear a little bit about your personal histories with My Bloody Valentine in general and this album in particular.
Yeah, I mean, of course, this is a classic record. Like you said, tough to even rank these. This is one of those bands I don't really even remember the first time I heard them. It was like something. I got into I don't know if people even know this, but I remember Yahtzee. It was like a music trading like forum where you would like post like, I think it was Mediafire back then, links of like records. And I got on there, and then, people would always have like, get into shoegaze, for example, or whatever. And I would just go in all of those things and listen to records. And, like I found this record, from that. And, like everybody else fell in love with it, and here we are.
Yeah, what about you, Darren?
Yeah, so I don't know why I've never tried doing this before, but I went to my Last FM because I kind of like you, Dan. I wasn't really sure when I started listening. I just couldn't really remember. But Last FM makes it very clear that 2009 was the year that I was like scrobbling My Bloody Valentine like crazy. Which would have meant I was probably, in college, probably walking around USF quite a bit. And now that I think about it, that was one of my favorite things to do, was just to listen to music and walk around that enormous campus. You know what I mean? So yeah, and I mean, I have been familiar with My Bloody Valentine. I'm pretty sure, Gabe, you were probably first amongst us that really got into them. So I kind of came to it a bit later. But, it was like an immediate reaction, just like one of those things that, what have I been doing with my entire life, not listening to this? You know what I mean? There was no period of like slowly getting into it. It was kind of like immediate. Yeah,
I don't remember when exactly it happened, like how old I was, but I just remember that, I remember the first time I was hearing this album because I was pushing up against that like Best Buy wall at that time where it was like I was running out of new things to discover that they sold at Best Buy. And I must have downloaded this too. And when I heard it, it was just like, holy shit. Like I had never heard sounds like this before. I mean, we'll talk about it, but those opening, the very opening of Only Shallow, like blew my mind wide open. And I've been, really listening, fairly obsessively ever since. Got many phases, got like tremendously into basically everything they've released, except for I've never listened to anything before, like Ecstasy and Wine. I don't know. I've never even been curious to check out that like early stuff. But, I've gone through phases where like this album is my favorite, Isn't Anything is my favorite, MBV is my favorite, was profoundly into that. I got to see them when they sort of reunited for MBV. And then me and Dan, we went and saw them. What, last year or the year before?
I think it was, year before in Chicago.
Yeah, so I've seen them twice now, and that's a bracing experience all on its own. But yeah, I mean, it's really something I've been obsessed with for a very long time, which I think makes it even harder to rank. Now, let's get into those ranks. Usually I screw with Dan a little bit by making him, be the first to say the worst track on a very classic album. But I'll be very surprised if we don't all have the same number 11 here. So Dan, what is your number 11?
Yeah, I mean, I think the only really easy choice in this ranking is the last one, and not that it's bad. It's just an interlude. So Touched. I assume that's what we all have.
Do you, Darren?
It's a little later on my list. No, I'm just kidding.
Are you joking?
Okay, God.
Thank God. Yeah, I mean, so it is an interlude. It's like a minute long, a little under. The thing that I think is weird here is that there are a bunch of interludes on this album, like 4 interludes or so, and this isn't even like the longest one. The longest one is probably at the end of What You Want, where it's just those kind of like looping synth lines leading into the last track, Soon. But, this one's definitely the most composed, but why do you think it's sort of singled out as its own track?
I think because, like, didn't the drummer completely make this song? I can't pronounce his name, but right. I think that's why it's separate, where the other interludes are just stuck to another track.
Yeah, I hadn't really considered it, because you're absolutely right, Gabe. A couple of the tracks here seem to end in a way that could have been carved out, I guess, as a 30-40 second loop or something like that.
Yeah, and this one I think is extra remarkable because no guitars. It's more of like a lo-fi synth, sort of like symphonic kind of a thing. There's like things imitating strings, timpani-esque drums, but like, again, like very kind of like lo-fi and distant sounding. It kind of like moves in an interesting way. It almost reminds me of some of these like on Pet Sounds, those Beach Boys instrumentals that are like almost like Brian Wilson just doing a little like a mini symphony or something. It's like designed to actually kind of move and grow, which is different from like the kind of loops that we get. I kind of feel like, I guess I want to ask about the interludes in general, and maybe we can kind of group touched into it, but I think they often give you like kind of a necessary breather, because so many of these tracks are so layered, like such huge walls of sound, that you sometimes very much need something like this, which is like pretty thin. Again, no guitars at all, just like kind of lo-fi synths, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, it's like a little breather. I think this record would suffer a lot if none of these interludes were there, and probably even if you took any of them out, I think it would suffer a little bit. They really are just like good breathing spaces, and none of them are like stupid or unnecessary. Like they all sound cool. Like this one's like really awesome. Like those like weird animal kind of noises, or I like I have no idea how like they even made that. Like, is it a sample screwed with? Is it a synth? I have no idea. They're really cool in their own right, I think.
Yeah. Do you like the transitions, Darren?
Oh, I love them. Honestly, it's like one of my favorite parts about this album, and I think we'll kind of come back to this idea of like I just feel like they each flow into each other. I love just getting lost in the record and not even like worrying about track names or where I'm at, because it just seems to it just kind of knows just the right amount to give you and then kind of settle you down a little bit, but it never like quite lets you go, right? You barely ever hear like complete silence before the next track picks up, you know what I mean? And I enjoy every second of it. Like, honestly, it's a great like headphone experience, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think it's also very interesting that there's often something like that feels like a high pass filter or something that these transitional pieces are run through in a way, which again just like makes it feel huge when we go into the next song. And obviously, like, the best part maybe about Touched is the way it transitions into To Hear Knows When, but we'll talk about that song a little later. All right, so we're back to you then, Dan. We all have the same number 11, Touch. What is your number 10?
Number 10, I put What You Want. Okay. We're going to say this over and over, but all the songs in here are great, so nobody bitch.
We can't nobody get mad, okay? It's just not fair.
Nobody get mad.
I can't promise I won't like flip out if something goes awry.
But basically, I put this song, so low because it's the one that's the closest to feeling out of place. It's the most sort of like normal song, like there's almost like not like that wall of sound here. I mean, the vocals are still like incredibly vague and obscured like the rest of the record, but it doesn't feel like they're buried under like these a million amps and just 1,000 guitars and whatever like the rest of it. This almost like sort of seems like a little bit of a holdover from earlier MBV era, like not quite, but just like it's the old is leaking through. Like if you told me this was the first song they wrote for this record, I would believe that, just because there's the glimpse of previous work here.
Yeah, I agree with that because it's like the punkiest song here.
Yeah.
And Isn't Anything has like a huge presence of, and some of their EPs and stuff have like this huge presence of these. They're basically punk songs, but they're so noisy that they're like sounding buried in mess. And I think this one is incredibly noisy. I have it just a little bit later, but it's almost the most abrasive, the harshest song here. It's like the one where, the people like to poke fun at My Bloody Valentine and say that it's basically like a pop song with like a vacuum running.
Yeah.
This is the song that sounds most like that because it's so trebly and abrasive. I think it's so interesting how like the vocals have all of the bass sucked out of them on this track in particular. And I think that that's something that is honestly almost like the coolest thing about this album for me. And it's something I'll talk about more later, but it's not like, I don't know, you think of this album as being like very coherent, like a very sustained sound throughout the whole thing. Mm-hmm. But if you really dig deep into it, every track is like almost arranged or constructed in an entirely different way. So like some tracks have huge booming bass, other tracks are just like pure treble, pure, like as close to white noise as possible. And this one is like particularly abrasive. You hear that like the bass is playing like high notes most of the time, so that it kind of like stays floating up above your head in a way, it's like a very, I agree that it's like maybe sounds a little bit more like Isn't Anything, but it's a very interesting production on this track all the same. Wouldn't you say, Darren?
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree. In fact, this is actually my number 9, and I will admit it was a little higher on my list not too long ago. It just kind of, just shuffling around with some of the other songs that ended up a bit lower. But, one of the things that this song highlights that I absolutely love about this record is that feeling of like, almost as if you're listening to complete chaos, like just total noise, but then you've got this very melodic like synth line or the vocals that kind of like hold it together, and suddenly you feel like the chaos actually is just as controlled as that beautiful melody that you're hearing from the vocals. You know what I mean? That like it all comes together and it's like a glue that's just holding the track together in a way. And I mean I love it. It's an amazing track. It really is. But
it's a rush of energy, and I do like when they do this.
And because they do it all over the album. I mean, that's the exhilaration of this album. It's like, kind of just constantly hammering away and like going at full power pretty much the entire time.
And yet
right?
Mm-hmm. Sometimes it like explodes. Sometimes like the chorus like blows up, and here it's more of like a just sustained energy the whole way through, like these pounding, driving drums that never quit. Another thing I think is kind of unique about this song is that this is something we'll talk about as well, but there's often like a sort of a hook, quote unquote, which is usually like a synth line that kind of shines through or something like that.
Yeah.
Here, the hook is actually just like one slamming chord. You know what I mean? It's just like, you know what I mean? It's not like the high shines through everything the way like, When You Sleep, that hook does or something like that. It's just like smashing chords. It adds to the punk edge, and I think it actually makes it kind of like something stands out a little bit. Would you agree with that, Dan?
Yeah, of course. I mean, like you said, that chord, and this is something that's crazy, like about MBV, like in general, is that like the hook is always like some sort of instrumental thing. It's rarely like a vocal. Right. And I think that this is a good example here because it, like I said, the kind of the reason I put it at number 10 is it's sort of a quote unquote normal song compared to the rest of the record, but it still is using that like kind of, I don't want to say trick, but for lack of a better word, I will, which is really interesting.
Yeah. All right, Darren, what is your number 10?
I get the feeling that every track we're going to talk about is going to sound as if it's the number 1 track.
Yeah, I
know. So for me, my number 10 is Blown a Wish.
Okay. I got that
all right.
quite a bit higher, honestly, but go ahead.
Same.
I'm not gonna. I can't talk about it as if it's like a bad track, or why I put it at number 10. There's just other moments in the album that I just love more. But this track has, gorgeous like vocal melodies happening. I can't really say exactly why, it's not as good as the other ones. Maybe it'll make more sense once I start explaining the other songs, I guess. But for me, it's just kind of one of the ones that, like, by the time you get to this point in the record, it's you're already like so embedded in the record, and like some of the tracks that kind of precede it, like really like take your breath away. I feel like in just the melodies and the moments and stuff. And when you get to this, it's, I don't want to say samey necessarily, but you know what I mean? Like I don't know.
I honestly, I feel like it's a real change all of a sudden, like a late album kind of change up that I think is really welcome. But Dan, if you also have it a little bit later, I think maybe we should save it, because I agree with you, Darren, that it's like useful somehow to like contrast it with other songs that we'll talk more about later on. So maybe we'll come back around to that. My number 10, I've got Come In Alone. Does that outrage anybody?
No, that's my number 8. So we're pretty close.
Okay.
It's later for me, so I'm a little heated, but not like
okay. All right, we're doing okay so far.
Yeah, so far.
So for me, I think it's like a glorious song. Obviously,
we're gonna say it every time.
It's the one song with like this absolutely booming bass. Like I mentioned before, just think about how different this is from What You Want. Like the arrangement is completely different, because this has this like booming low end, and it just explodes out of your speakers as soon as it starts. The drums are like hard rock drums, like capital R rock, in a way that's like pretty almost like unique on this album. They're just like kind of rock and slamming, and I think that's the reason why I put it basically the last like true song for me, is that it sounds the most like a alternative rock kind of song. I will say though that it's like the lead thing is just incredible, because you almost can't tell. It almost seems to transform from like, is that vocals? No, it's a synth. No, is that feedback? It's like every time it happens, I can't even tell what the sound is. And I also love how it sort of alternates. Like sometimes it comes in like a little early. It just does like the, you know what I mean? It like doesn't do the full hook every time. So yeah, what are your thoughts about it, Dan?
Yeah, those drums, that like downbeat, smashing, that is like sort of a stadium rock thing. In fact, in my notes I wrote, is this a shoegaze U2? It feels like, that sounds negative because U2 fucking sucks, but I was just trying to be a little funny. But it's like the song that is sort of like a rocker, where the rest of the album, I mean, even What You Want, like we just talked about, being like sort of like quote unquote a normal song, a little punky and stuff. It doesn't have that like big like I could almost see this as like everybody pounding their fist in a stadium, holding up the lighters or whatever they do. So that's why I put it lower, because
you want like Eddie Vedder or whatever.
Yeah, Eddie Vedder.
Yeah. Maybe like it gives me like a little Def Leppard vibe with those drums. It's like, just somebody with one arm could play this. And just
well, we should actually mention, because I guess people listening to this probably know a lot of the backstory, but there is like all these this strange that him taking so long and everything, but also there's things like the drums, like the drummer was like sick for most of the recording, and so a lot of the drums are just like, they had him record like simple loops, and then they either cut them up and used them as like a drum machine, but the samples, or just like use these simple loops. And I think it's like sort of apparent here that is what they're doing, because it is like the drums are sort of they're sort of unchanging for the most part during this track, and it just sort of always, is that like simple downbeat, kind of thing, most of the song, if not all of it.
Yeah. Do you want to share your thoughts, or is it a lot later for you, Darren?
I think it's later enough that I'd rather wait.
Big U2 fan.
All right. So that was my number 10. We're back around to Dan with your number 9.
Okay, yeah, number 9 for me is To Hear Knows When.
Oh my!
This is absurd. Absolutely absurd. I'm mad.
What?
I know. I knew this one was going to get a little pushback, and in fact, I had it switched with "Come In Alone" for a long time. It just, I don't know. This one, it's almost like everything's almost a little bit too obscured. It's almost like.
Wow.
I mean, basically, it's unfair to have to you essentially have to shit talk half the songs on the record for it to make any sense.
Shit talk to hear knows when.
So I'm just picking out the negative things about it.
Here we go.
Yeah. I love the song. Don't get pissed off at me. But it's mostly that it's just like right here we're almost a little too obscured. It sounds like trying to hear someone say something to you over, just a 1,000 amps, buzzing or anything. But I will say,
sounds awful.
Yeah,
I know. When I say that too,
you
that's
like noise, isn't this?
I know that's right up my alley. I guess no one sings in song is my thing. But well, that's but as we talked about the those interludes and stuff, I really do. I love the one at the end of this that it's sort of like a weird backwards sounding thing, into When You Sleep, and I think that it just flows so perfect. I mean, the the sequencing in this record is second to none. But I think this is one of my favorite interludes on this record.
Well, I'm gonna for sure save my thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely.
So maybe you should just say your number 9, Darren.
So yeah, my number 9 was What You Want.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
So we're on to my number 9, which is When You Sleep.
Ooh, all right.
I mean,
okay.
Who are you?
If you want to do that,
what is this?
I know that this is a fan favorite. For me, you said this about What You Want, Dan, but I think this is the most normal sounding song here. It's the least layered rhythm section, guitar section on the whole album, to where individual strums are very discernible. It almost just sounds like kind of power chords in a way, and it's there's almost none of the kind of warping, blurring in and out of focus thing that he does. It's kind of just playing chords like a lot of rock bands do. The hook, this big bright synth thing that's unforgettable, it kind of it almost verges on Sonic video game music for me a little bit. And yet
what?
I can't,
I'm glad you made a worse blunder than me.
You'd be going through these loops and it's do 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 do. It'd be with a MIDI guitar on the Sonic soundtrack. But I don't mean to shit talk it, because despite that, it ends up being very beautiful and just totally gets stuck in your head. The one thing I want to mention here, though, and this is kind of true of the album, is do you guys feel it gets this album gets a little formulaic? We sort of alluded to it earlier, but when you listen to this a lot, you start to realize that almost every song is the hook thing, where everything's booming and there's a high synth line that does something kind of catchy, and then the mellow out for the breathy verse, and then it's give me that bright synth line, and then it always does the hook twice, all the way through 2 times at the end to kind of add the extra crescendo. But you know what I mean? It's a little bit formulaic.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I get that. The songs do sort of follow a pattern. I'll use rather than a formula. But I think if you look at each individual song, I think you can come to that conclusion. But I think as a whole, as one piece of art or something, and I think that's what they're wanting, with these interludes and everything. There's clearly a effort to make this, like Darren said earlier, there's basically no silence, there's no gaps in between the songs. They all pretty much flow into each other. And I think when someone does that, you're saying this is a complete piece of art. It shouldn't really be broken into 11 pieces. Probably not ranked like we're doing right now either.
Right.
Right. And so when you look at it that way, I think to make something to be cohesive, you do sort of have to stick to some sort of like pattern, formula kind of thing as the overarching like idea. I think what stops them from being like formulaic is because like when you listen to like Isn't Anything and the EPs and stuff before this, it's different. It's not like this is their thing. This is what they do. It's always that every time that it's only formulaic within the record.
Yeah, what do you think about that, Dan?
I mean, I don't think of it as a bad thing here, and here's why. Like, if I'm thinking about something being formulaic, then I'm thinking about a couple of things. Like, how long is the record, right? What is this formula, the sound, I guess, something that is like, unique or like really, really, really interesting that I'm willing to accept the fact that like I kind of know what I'm getting and I have an expectation with every song. You know what I mean? There's really not like a slow dive sort of moment on this record where you have all of the shoegaze kind of get stripped away and you've got like a really quiet, acoustic like song, right? Like it just doesn't.
Right.
Yeah. And I don't want that on this record.
I agree.
To change like that. I am totally down for just give me all the guitars and the sound and the noise. Like when I reach the end of this record, I'm like, let's hear it again. You know what I mean? And that to me kind of defeats the whole. Oh well, I just don't think of it as like a bad thing. Like I'm okay with it, and I'm glad that they didn't try to. On tracks, 8 or 9, 3/4 of the way through the album, try to do something dramatically different. I mean, I know you kind of mentioned that Blown a Wish sort of gives you a different vibe and stuff, which is fine. And of course, I think Soon, to me, is pretty different. Especially when it starts. But
I think I think it sort of like leads up to that bottom portion of the record because I agree with you, Darren. Like it sort of like makes this little bit of a shift around like Blown a Wish,
right?
But then those last 3 songs, like they're so perfectly put together with each other that it's just like the record's like sort of slowly evolving, and I think like you said too, that there's no little quiet acoustic song or something real different in the middle, and I think that's like one thing that's great about this record. It is like this big like Leviathan in your face. We said like Touched and these little intros are really like the only sort of like breath you get, but they're even then they're still like. It's not like a calm, nice, little ditty or something. They're still like sort of like steeped in this same sort of feeling as the rest of the record.
Yeah, I mean, I guess for me, it's like I find my favorite songs are the ones that I see. They never depart a lot from that formula of like instrumental hook, quieter verse, instrumental hook, so on. But my favorite ones are the ones that like depart a little bit or mess with that a little bit, which is interesting because it's like the album sort of establishes its own formula of very unique sound. And then when it departs from it itself is when I get most excited. Maybe that's just from a lot of listening, but I will say that, and this is true of When You Sleep, it's like, it might be predictable, but the hook always delivers. Like that instrumental hook, it's always like sort of a high synth line or something, but it always is like magical. So that's how I feel about this song. I don't know if you guys want to dive into it or you want to wait. We're doing a lot of delaying because I think our lists are going to be pretty different at this point.
Yeah. This one's not coming up for a minute on my.
Okay, then we're on to, I believe, Dan's number 8.
My number 8 we already talked about. Come In Alone.
Okay, Darren, you're number 8.
I have a feeling every selection I make is going to anger. Number 8 for me is Sometimes.
What?
Okay. All right.
So,
oh my God.
Sometimes comes in at the end of like my absolute favorite portion of the record, like basically 5 tracks right in the middle of the album that just to me is the heart of the record. The reason why, I mean, I love the song, obviously. I mean, I'm just going to say that every time before I start talking about it. It's one that I find myself not being quite as like, I guess, blown away, maybe having my breath taken away. It's fairly the same kind of throughout. And it's odd to even say this, that like the vocals which are almost always buried and hard to understand, are like even further buried, I think, on this almost like a whisper in a way. And I don't know, I just don't find it quite as like exhilarating to listen to this track compared to like the previous 4. You know what I mean?
Jesus Christ.
Well, yeah, I know. Well, this is not coming up for a minute in my list either, but I'm tired of pushing everything back, so I'll just go ahead and talk about it now.
Okay.
But I'll save the number, for the listeners. But but basically the things you said are some of the reasons I love this track. That whisper. I think here is one of the best places the vocals work. It's like the music is like a wall, like we got a wall built here.
This is like amplifier worship. This is like pure Boris, pure Sun.
Exactly.
With a low electric guitar.
Mm-hmm.
It's like it's just to listen to the textures. I just love. I could get lost in it.
Oh, exactly. I mean, my note I wrote, this is if Sun wrote a ballad, because we've got this giant, amplifier worship kind of sound, but then we've got like the sweetest, like whispered vocal. It's almost like she's singing it as loud as she can, but there's just this like massive, wall of sound behind her that just drowns it out. And I think that this is one of the places on this record the vocals like work the best. It's just like such a strange dichotomy between you've got the sweetest sound and the like harshest sound ever, and it's just such like a beautiful marriage.
Yeah, I mean, and I think this is. I mean, I do think there are some female vocals toward the end, maybe, or mixed in with the synth, but it is mostly like a Kevin Shields.
Yeah, it's hard to tell when
solo.
it's Belinda, when it's Kevin, when it's both of them.
Yeah, but it really, his whispery, breathy, soft vocals are. It's just like the perfect marriage, like you said, where a lot of this album is trying to strike this balance of like it's so huge and harsh and abrasive that it's soft and like a cloud or something like that, and this one like just nails it with like the whispery vocals on such a like huge wall of sound. And he plays with a lot of different textures with his guitars, but this is one where it's really like low droning notes, like in a Sun Earth kind of style. I also think this is another great example of how like unique the arrangements are on this album, even though it sounds like one of a piece, because it's constructed from like basically just downstrummed acoustic guitar. I also always love that it starts with that like like the same thing as Two-Headed Boy from
it is. Someone should do a mashup.
I know they should. And so it's like these like downstrum, it gives it this pulse riding through it. You've got like some sort of tom, probably like low tom sort of beating that. And then you've got like this kind of, you could barely identify, but like this low synth pad kind of sound. And then it like sort of a minute or two into the song starts to climb suddenly into this like just angelic, like ethereal, like the synth just keeps coming higher. You know what I mean? Like you're always surprised it goes another step up, and it just gets like, I think just absolutely breathtaking. I mean,
I do love the way the end of the song kind of takes off with the synth just for a whole minute, basically.
Yeah. I love, there's a lot of that on this album where it's like really just let's just let it ride for a while. But I won't reveal the number because I do think this is like one of the absolute masterpieces on this album, so I won't be saying it for a while. That was your what, Darren? Number 8?
That was 8, yep.
Okay, so my number 8 is What You Want, which we talked about. And let me just kind of add, like, so I'm a big fan of like the kind of feed me with your kiss style like we were talking about from Isn't Anything Like That, punk, like really abrasive. And I do like how they kind of make that same style fit into like the ethereal kind of glow of this album. But I wanted to, ask, do you think that this, like the way that this album uses vocals, in such a buried way, because I think they are like so buried because all the bass is sucked out of them and it sounds like they're getting swallowed up by these like driving guitars. Like, can you think of anything like that before this? I feel like breathy buried vocals are now like just part of the fabric of indie experimental music. But I was trying to think, like, did anybody ever use vocals like a synth, the way that they're used on this album before?
Yeah, I mean, off the top of my head, I can't think of anything. Yeah, I mean, that very well could have come from that, because you're right. You know, that became like a whole big thing with like the like beach house and all that. You know, I can't think of that genre. You know, just like that. You know, that was like the biggest thing in like the early 2010s or whatever.
Yeah, it became. I mean, like Elliott Smith does like the breathiest vocals you've ever heard, and it's just like it became such a part of like indie music. You kind of feel me on this, Darren?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's, maybe we'll get into this later too, but like the idea that this album came out in 1991, like it just hardly makes any sense. You know what I mean? For them to think that, it just seems crazy to think that like, yeah, let's just, we're just going to keep the vocals really low and no one's going to really understand anything that we're saying. And that's totally fine. You know what I mean? Like it seems so bold to make that conscious decision.
Yeah, they're just part of the sound, and it's like it's such a like. It seems so obvious now, but I feel like at this time it must have been bizarre. Like, what do you mean you want to bury the vocals? Like the that's the lead instrument on every song ever. You know? It's like,
exactly.
I think maybe we take it for granted now, but it's pretty incredible. So Dan, you're number 7.
All right, number 7 for me. I put, and I know I'm probably gonna get shit, but I put "Soon" at number 7.
Okay, I got it at number 6, actually.
Oh, I've got it at number 6. Here we go.
Wow.
Okay. We're back, guys.
We're all about to shit on "Soon." All right.
Yeah, here we go. I think this is like a great, I talked about this a couple minutes ago, but this last like little quarter of the record or whatever, it like sort of takes like a little bit of a sonic shift, and we're getting more like quote unquote normal, a little more upbeat, I feel, and this is like a really kind of great like final merging of the previous parts of the record and these like sort of dancey tracks. Like this one's it's real catchy, kind of, but it's still got this like vague, obscured quality to it. I think it really, I mean, honestly, the way I'm talking about it, you would think I would have it higher in the list, but I think this is like really a great like example of My Bloody Valentine in the sense that like it really is like sort of a merging of all their styles. Like I think if you were going to show someone, just one song from this record, this might be the second one that I would show them.
I was going to say, whoa.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, it's like the poppiest My Bloody Valentine ever was, though. So that makes it like a little bit. I mean, yes, more accessible, but a little bit unique in the canon. What do you think about this track, Darren?
I mean, it shifted on my list from lower to higher. I will say that. I feel like the very beginning is kind of like off-puttish after listening to this entire record, and then you've got this like extremely clean, drum machine sound, and what sounds like a very 90s like, filtered guitar.
I mean, this is like the only, because I just imagine that at the time this must have been like the most modern drum sound, and now it sounds very dated. It really sounds like 1991, like kind of breakbeat drum. I think it's interesting too how like it's got the most intricate bass playing on the whole album, like with the like when it's got that like fuzzy guitar and it's like just the little synth loops, and you've got like this like doo doo boom boom boom. It's almost like funky, It's like it almost feels like an attempt at a hit, and it's the only time on this record where I feel like this sounds like 1991.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, for sure. This really is the only one that sort of shows its date, and I think it's because of that drum machine for the most part. That's sort of a problem with earlier electronic equipment. You can sort of always like place where it's from,
Yeah, and I feel like I can almost hear like it's not there, but you can, because of like the way like the guitars are sometimes like with the tremolo effects and stuff. Like it almost sounds like DJ scratches like really deep in the background. Like just imagine if that was like added to this track, like it'd be like the lamest shit ever. Just adding that one thing, it would be the shittiest song you've ever heard. But it's not like, it's really not bad. It's actually like quite magnificent. What do you? Is there a hook on this song? And if so, what is the hook?
Isn't it the?
Is that the hook, or is that like the verse? Is that the bridge? It's like weird because it's just sustaining like one single like. Well,
it keeps coming back, right?
Yeah.
So the song has this like trajectory. To me, it's like going up a hillside, into noise basically, and then it drops back down immediately into that like synth line, and you're like, oh yeah, I know where I'm at now.
I feel like the synth line is like the come down, and then like the build up, the explosion is like the like just droning, long sustained guitar notes with like pretty sustained vocal lines. Even though she's basically singing a verse, it's like more, it's bigger and more triumphant than, it basically, my point is like, it's weird because it simultaneously sounds, and this is to the song's credit, it sounds like an attempt at like radio play, and yet I think it has no hook at all. Like, for a lot of it, it's just kind of sustaining on the same chord, which is something that they do a lot. You know what I mean? Like, isn't that kind of like a weird paradox?
Yeah, I mean, it is, because you're right. I mean, if anything it's I agree with Darren, but it's not as obvious of a hook as like some of the other, little synth lines or guitar lines we get on the record. And so, yeah, you're right. It's really strange that this is sort of the one that is the, hit single off the record or whatnot.
Yeah, I mean, so I think that makes it like both the most
also it's
dated,
the
but also
longest song, which is strange.
It is the longest. I also think that's to its credit that it just kind of goes on forever, and with like the it's like almost meditative, and this is like kind of a constant on this album where it's almost like a trick or something that they do where they kind of like they're changing notes, but they kind of like make you forget that they're changing notes. You know what I mean? Like it almost sounds like just one, like every song just sounds like one sustained chord the whole time in a way. And it's like, it just makes it very drony, like very ambient, very like meditative, trance inducing the way it does that. And yet it actually is like just changing chords like a pop song. You know what I'm saying, Darren? Like it sounds like it's changing chords, but it sounds like it's not changing chords, but it definitely is.
Yeah. I mean, it's like a weird like deconstruction of a pop song, you know what I mean? Like it has like the elements, and if you could like kind of like what you mentioned, Gabe, you could just take certain things out of it and maybe add in a DJ scratch here, and you've like completely manipulated the song. And
yeah,
but going back to your point about the sort of transit, the quality at the end of the song, right, where it just kind of keeps going and looping and stuff. I absolutely love it. I'm going to mention it on a couple of the other tracks on the record because, there's just something so meditative about it. And the way that most of the tracks don't actually truly end, like they don't come to an end, gives you this like really like wonderful feeling of like, man, they just like playing in a band and you just keep on going. Like you just feel the energy, and you just, there's no one's looking at each other thinking like the song needs to end. You're just kind of in this moment. And you're just feeling it, right? And the band is feeling it, and then you as a listener is just like, don't end. Like, I don't want this to end. Just keep on going.
Yeah. A lot of songs give me that feeling. And also, let me add that it's really cool how at the end, right at the very end, you get the like high-pass filter trick that basically like turns the song into another one of these interludes, you know what I mean, as it fades out. I think that's like really ties a nice like bow on the whole package. But that was your number 7, Dan. So what is your number 7, Darren?
My number 7 is Loomer.
Okay, and that's my number 6.
Okay. I mean, I love this track. It's I feel like Only Shallow is, and I mean, we'll talk about this song, but like this is such a great introduction to what, this entire record is going to be. But Loomer is like a brilliant follow-up, like a brilliant second song. It just feels like a really great way to say, okay, you got the sort of Smells Like Teen Spirit song out of the way, but this is like the In Bloom, where it's like arguably almost equally as good in different ways, but just
sort of in the shadow.
Well, yeah, it's like it's Only Shallow like sort of introduces you to the world, and now you're in it with like Loomer, you know what I mean? So you've got the raging guitars and like this great guitar line that's kind of like carrying through the heavy tom work that you're going to hear later on. You guys were just talking about that, right? And then of course, vocals that like you almost feel like you can sing along to, so that makes it to me accessible, like a song that I just like can't turn off. Like I love it. Love to play it loud, you know what I mean? Because you just the guitars are like distorting and turned up as loud as possible. You know,
this is in the sun zone. Again.
Yeah,
like this is like I love very amplifier worship.
Yeah, I love the crunch that's on the guitar in the song. It's just it's just so crunchy and nice. I love it.
Yeah, and like his trademark like kind of bending, warping the chords and everything is like all over this, and it just gives you so much like texture to just listen to. You could listen to it again and again and again. For me, I have this like a little bit higher because just as I listened to this album, it just kind of kept like climbing up and up because it feels a little insubstantial because it's so short. It's like 2 minutes or something, and then we get like another one of these. We get the main transition touch, but it like. It feels like a less fully developed song, and it doesn't have like a big hook, like a super catchy hook or anything. But to me, it's like almost the best example of that, like kind of amplifier worship quality that I think inspired like a whole wave of artists. Obviously, this song is like really all about the texture and like that, the synth line that's like rising for the quote unquote chorus or hook, it's just really just almost like feedback or something, like sort of just ascending. And the just tom crushing, and you even have an acoustic guitar like hitting the down notes. In fact, it just feels like everything is just hitting down notes on this one. And it kind of gives it like it makes it like a standout for me, like a very unique song on the album. What do you think, Dan?
Yeah, I mean, I really agree with a lot of what Darren said. It just feels like it like what you said, it being the in bloom of the record, like really. I just super agree with that. It's in the shadow of Only Shallow, but it is just like a great song on its own, and like really the perfect second track on here. I think like they really could have made a better choice. Just bringing you deeper into this world, and I mean,
I don't think you want this song to be any longer. You know what I mean? I think
no, exactly. Like it's like the perfect length.
Yeah, the down strumming. I mean, I think it's like pulsating, and it's just a great follow-up track to just a monster in front of it. You know what I mean? And then the way it kind of then goes into Touched sort of sets the stage for the remainder of the album in such like a wonderful way that, it's a track that you can never skip, obviously. You know what I mean? Like you got to have it as part of that experience.
Yeah, I just feel like it's one of those like for some reason I find myself thinking about the Velvet Underground a lot while listening to this because there is like that kind of like noise element, but also the like inspiration. I want to talk about this later, but like how influential this album is, and I just imagine like Loomer starting the entire genre of like drone. Like I just imagine Earth is just like listening to this album, they finish track 2, they stop it, and they start the band. Like I've heard all I need to hear, and it's just like you just hear genres coming out of songs like this. I feel like that's how inventive they are. So that was your number 7. My number 7 is I Only Said.
Okay.
Oh my God.
Are you serious?
It's fine.
Yeah, it's fine. It's fine. Okay.
I think we're at the point where pretty much every song that we talk about is just could go anywhere almost.
Yeah, well, it was weird because I had this pretty low actually, and then it just sort of like kept moving up one spot as I went along these last 2 weeks. And it's a really interesting song because it does like the formula with the synth hook, but the hook is not like very catchy. Actually, it's more of like
okay.
It's not like catchy like a pop catchy. It's like it's catchy like a like you're being hypnotized or something. Like
I don't know. I've had this like stuck in my. This gets stuck in my head anytime I listen to this record. That
it does, but it's like
thing. It just like I think it's incredibly catchy.
It's like catchy, but in a different way. It's like almost like a Middle Eastern kind of vibe. It's got like a microtonal, like it's so bendy kind of a vibe. And for me, what makes the song work, right, is I think you have incredible rhythm guitar on this song, like with the layering and the warping and everything. You've got like kind of phasing moments is another cool thing about this album, is like he's layered so many guitars, I think, and he's like sort of deliberately playing some like kind of like a little slower, speeding up here, slowing down here, to where it's like phase, you get a phasing effect like in your head if you're listening on headphones or something. So like the rhythm is just awesome on this. But then like my favorite thing is that the song basically ends with 2 minutes left, and then it just kind of like jams like in the most trance-inducing moment on the whole album for me. And what you have is like this little synth line, which is like so short, like, and you've got like a bass line that is the pattern is a different length. Meanwhile, the drum loop is also a different length, and it's got kind of like a lopsided feel, but it gives you like almost like it gives you like a larger phasing kind of vibe, the way that these patterns are not the same length, you know what I'm saying? And they're it gives it like the most meditative, trance-inducing moment for me on the whole album.
Yeah, I mean, it's higher up on my list, but pretty much what you said is some of the things that I absolutely love about it. The way, like, I was listening to this album obviously a ton, and every time I came to this track, I loved it. I love every second of it, but I'm actually like looking forward to just that loop at the end and just, feeling like it never
just
ends.
Zone out.
You know what I mean? Yeah, it's just, it's so incredible. I feel like the guitar sound is so mesmerizing. It's like something that I could only wish to have ever thought of or achieve. You know what I mean? Much of this record, it's not really something I'm like, yeah, let me just go pick up my guitar because I want to play this. It's you can't. You know what I mean? It's so much of this record makes me think like, wow, this is like the pinnacle of like the electric guitar, like just being able to take a guitar and an amp and create with it without any sort of computerized effects and all the other like type of technology that we have access to today. Like this is just like pure texturizing and rhythms and all of these different things being considered to create such a unique sound, and it blends together so perfectly, I feel like, on this track alone, that that's why it's higher up on my list, basically. And when you reach that end, you are almost like transcending in a way, and you haven't even, like, you're only halfway through this masterpiece of a record. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, this is much higher on my list too. I mean, I love that, like that line that you're saying is not that catchy. I just like couldn't disagree with you more. It's like the thing that always gets stuck in my head whenever like I listen to this record. Even like when we saw them live, like they played that, and like that kind of got stuck in my head. Even from the show and stuff. It's just I think this is like such a masterful track. And like Darren said, I mean, it is just like, I especially on the old podcast and a little bit on this one, like I always bitch about like guitar solo, just like it being like sort of a boring, overused instrument nowadays and stuff. But this is using it, making it brand new again. You're creating, and I mean the whole record does it, but I think this song, maybe in particular, like just really like reinvents this instrument that's like basically been the the basis for Western popular music for decades at this point.
Yeah, it is a standout as far as texture and using the guitar for sure. I just, it was like when I first put it on the list, I had it a little lower, and I was like, honestly, it's like the second longest song on the album, and it just, the last 2 minutes are just, but then I started to decide that that's maybe the best thing about it, but I don't know, it's like sometimes I feel like maybe it's just a little too long on the same thing, especially because that hook, as we all agree, is not that catchy. Okay, we're on to Dan, your number 6.
My number 6 is Loomer, which we already talked about.
Okay, Darren, your number 6.
Number 6 for me was Soon, and we talked about that.
Okay, and that was also my number 6, Soon. So we're back to you, Dan, with number 5.
All right, yeah, my number 5, Blown a Wish. I can't remember.
Mine too.
Oh, hey, nice. Did you already talk about this one, Darren? I can't remember.
No, okay. Darren did, but we pushed our discussion back.
Yeah, I fucking should have brought a pen and scratched them out. But yeah, Blown a Wish. This I think is like the well, like I've talked about, sort of this turning point of the record where this last quarter or whatever like becomes a little bit more upbeat, and this is the first sort of signs of that. And I think I think it's kind of the best one of these. It's just, again, it's almost like a normal song. It's got a little dancey feel to it, and it's like, yeah, you can almost understand some of the words on this one. You know, like the first line, like I sort of kind of know what's being said almost a little bit. You know, I mean, this has got to be like the only record I've listened to over 100 times, and I actually know 0 words from it. But yeah, you know, this is, if I was going to learn the lyrics to one song, I think this would be the easiest and the first one to start with. I think this is just the highlight of that like second movement of the record, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, for me, this is like such a, and again, it's testament to this album where it sounds like it's all the same thing the whole time, but there's really so much difference because just the arrangement of the song is so unique, where the guitar, I don't even know what the fuck the guitars are doing.
Yeah, me neither.
They're like clean. They sound like a sitar almost. You know what I mean? Like it's not fuzzy at all. It's like got this like trancey, like kind of sitar drony sounds, like bending more than any of the rhythms, you know, on this whole album, like warping in and out of focus so much. And yet it's got this kind of bright, clean, like sheen to it. The drum beat is like kind of retro in a cool way, unlike, like, it doesn't sound dated to me like Soon does a little bit. It's got more of like this kind of like classic 80s sound almost, and just like how breathy the vocals are and how they almost sound like looped or sampled, you know, like the pa-pa, pa-pa. It's like, it gives the whole thing like a very, very, very unique sound on the album, I think. Another thing that's so cool about it is that like the, you know, a trick that I think I mentioned before is that a lot of times, like during the verses, the bass will go really high. Like you'll hear it goes so high. And I think it's because, you know, Kevin Shields wants it to kind of blend in with the guitars and give you this kind of floating feeling. But then for the choruses, it usually like drops down. So that's like totally the case in, you know, like I Only Said, the song I was just talking about. High during the verses gives you this floating feeling, like crash down with when the bass drops low. This one, it just stays high the entire time. It like never drops low. And it makes you just feel like you're floating the whole time, combined with like these really ethereal, you know, just glistening vocals and like just this glittering style guitar. You know, like I felt like, Darren, you were kind of saying that like by this point in the album you start to feel like it's getting a little repetitive or something, but don't you feel like this is kind of a very unique sound on the album? Yeah,
I mean, it definitely is. I think that I feel like when I'm listening to this record, this is like I'm coming down from, again, what I sort of described as like the heart of the record, that the center piece of the record in those middle 4 or 5 tracks. And so what I love so much about those, this track doesn't necessarily quite have, which is fine, because I don't think you really want to just be hammered away all the way until the end of the record. So, I mean, I did put it like lower on my list, but it's largely because I just kind of prefer that very focused guitar amplifying kind of feel from the middle part of the record. But I obviously love this song just as much as, you know, all the others. So.
Oh, and all the ooze layering at the end. Like,
I think the vocal work on this one is probably maybe the best, close to the best on the entire record.
Just incredible. Okay, so Darren, you're number 5.
Number 5 for me is Come In Alone, and I didn't talk about it because you bastards both put it so low on your list. Unbelievable. So, you know, this song, I have a couple of things to say. So, the end of I Only Said, right, has, you know, kind of that like looping, and it starts to fade out, like it's almost complete silence, and then smack, you're just like right back into it with this, you know, crunching guitar sound. And you guys, like, I had never thought of this song as sounding like, you know, an alt rock or, you know, grunge type
it just crashes in like, pour some sugar on me.
I just can't believe you would give that credit to Def Leppard and not to, you know, I feel like this sound, they own it in such a way that like I just don't even consider things like Def Leppard or like, you know, any other rock band or whatever. And I get it. The way you're describing it, like I can't really argue. Like when when I, isolate it and I'm thinking, yeah, the drums do kind of sound like just a one-armed man just, going crunching away at it, but, and maybe it's just, the way the album sort of envelops you and just kind of absorbs you, and you're in a trance, like you're just in this world by the time you reach Coming Alone, that I'm not really thinking about that, and I'm just trying to let the sound just wash over me. And that's what a lot of these like tracks here in the middle section tend to do for me, is just kind of completely wash over with this wall of sound. I talked about it before with I Only Said, with the guitar work and everything. And then this is another track that I feel like you can kind of somewhat sing along to, or maybe hum along to, because you don't really know the lyrics. Right. And just the sort of energy, the drive that I love so much about this record is so well encompassed in like a song like I Only Said, as well as like Coming Alone. That's why, for me, this is like the core My Bloody Valentine type of sound. And in fact, I'm not a huge fan. I mean, I'm a fan of like Isn't Anything and like MBV, but like Loveless to me, and we'll get into this later, I think just so owns this sound in such a way that like anything else is just lesser. You know what I mean? Like it's just hard for me to listen to anything else and not want to come back to this record, because of like kind of what was established in a song like this is sort of what I'm talking about when I think about My Bloody Valentine. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I feel like if Soon sounds a little bit too much like an early 90s dance track, this one sounds a little bit too much like an early 90s alternative rock track. And, but it's weird because when it's on, I'm like totally like sucked into it. But it's just like when I think about it, it's just like that booming fuzz bass, like the like hard rock drums. It's just like...
Stop saying that, damn it. You're going to change my perception of this song.
It's just not as unique, I think, as My Bloody Valentine could be.
That's fair.
Okay, so my number 5, we already talked about, Blown a Wish. So that leads us to, Dan, your number 4.
Yeah, number 4 for me is Sometimes.
Okay, all right, getting better. Not perfect, but getting better.
Yep, already talked about it, but, number 4.
All right, so that means, Darren, you're number 4.
Number 4 for me is When You Sleep. Both of you guys already talked about it?
That's my number 3.
I talked about it, but you guys refused to.
That's right. Okay.
Yeah, so number 3 for me.
So number 3 for Dan. Okay, so, I mean, I don't understand how you don't find this, like, probably one of the most, like, exhilarating songs on the entire record, Gabe. It's got it has the formula there, right? The crunching guitars, definitely. The synthy, like I'm sure you think that's like from a video game or something too, right?
One of the most exhilarating songs on the Sonic soundtrack.
Yeah, that's for sure. That's right. This one again, I feel like the vocal work is like excellent. I love like the sort of like whatever they're saying. It's great. I love it. I kind of very simple. I feel like I'm just going to kind of say a lot of the same things about this and I Only Said and Coming Alone, because they all sort of share some of my favorite like guitar work. You know what I mean? My favorite parts.
I mean, that's
record.
my big question here is, like I was saying, it's like this is the least like layered guitar. It's like basically just driving, like you can really hear the individual strums. I mean, compare this to I Only Said, and it's like it's just so much more ordinary, I think. You know what I mean? There's like none of like kind of the trademark.
It's like dialed back a bit,
style.
yeah.
It is. I mean, you're leaving the murk like slightly here, but I think that it works to its advantage.
How bright is the synth line? Like the synth line is so bright.
I think in this song, you slightly leave the smirk, and it's hinting at like what comes a little bit later in that like last little quarter I've talked about. I feel like you're getting like a little bit of a taste here with it being a little less layered, a little clearer and everything. It's just like a I think the song like so ties the record together like so well.
Yeah.
Like with these little it's still following that formula, but it's peaking towards this new formula.
And I feel like the
switched to.
vocals, I mean, it's such a huge part because like you put on some big named singer with who's like in the center and like very clear, and you have a totally different song. I think that the vocal approach is critical to the MBV sound. You know what I mean? Like it's you may say that the guitars and everything sounds ordinary, but like when you insert this sort of vocal style, I feel like you've changed everything.
I've read, I just like frankly don't believe it, but I read that both vocals are by Kevin Shields, but it's like definitely the Belinda is singing on top of his vocal, right? Like,
yeah, he said that it's like like him, and he like pitched one or something. He said it's just him. But yeah, I mean, a lot of the stuff like I've read from him, it's almost like, you got to take it with a grain. Like he says, they've spent more time on the lyrics than like recording the songs. It's like I feel like he's bullshitting us a little bit, So anything he says, I take with at least a little bit of a grain of salt.
Yeah, but the vocals are pretty interesting there, definitely with like the layered on top or whoever it is. But yeah, I mean, I said my piece. I just think it's like a little slightly more ordinary song. I just can't deny how beautiful like the hook is, but it's just like this is a moment where in the album where I'm like, they have a formula. I see, and this is what they're gonna do every song. And it's like most of the time I just forget about it, but this time I just can't not forget about it because of how like bright and shining that like synth hook is and how hooky it is. It's like so overt. So that was your number 4, Darren?
Yes.
Okay, so my number 4 is, drum roll please, Only Shallow.
Oh man,
I knew.
God. I knew you'd be the contrarian.
So I don't think it's contrarian because basically you've got, this is like a song where you've got the same structure, the hook, verse, and it does the same thing that a lot of songs do here where like the bass is low and booming, exploding on the hook and goes real high during the verses, which make it like more ethereal and graceful. And then it just explodes on these hooks. But I just cannot deny that the sound, whatever that sound is, of these guitars just like exploding into your face, especially after the drum roll, it's just like, it's really unbelievable every time, never gets old. And yet I feel like for me, this song has entered like kind of a Smells Like Teen Spirit territory.
Sure.
Where it's just like, I basically find myself just like that sound. I'll never get over it. It blew my mind open the first time I heard this album, and it still blows my mind every time. But it's just like kind of a basic, like, it's almost like a hook, verse thing. And if it didn't have that incredible sound, I think it would be, one of these like pretty good songs that I had ranked a lot lower. You know what I mean?
Ooh.
No, I don't. I really don't. I really disagree with you.
Well, why? I mean, why does it stand up? Don't you feel like it's in the Smells Like Teen Spirit zone at this point?
I mean, yes, but I mean, unlike Smells Like Teen Spirit, if I turn the radio on right now, I won't hear this song. So it's not like, it's not so like, it doesn't have the overplayedness. I mean, it has the like, earth-shattering effect of like Smells Like Teen Spirit. I think that this is just like, this is shoegaze, this is the, now that's what I call shoegaze, volume 1 right here,
Track one,
this is exactly like, this is just like, this is introducing you into this new world that you're about to discover. It's just, I mean, obviously I put this at number 1, by the way I'm talking and stuff, but I think that this just sort of like has to be number 1. It's like, if you're being honest with yourself, the most important Nirvana song is Smells Like Teen Spirit, and I think the most important My Bloody Valentine song is Only Shallow. Yeah, I think yeah, it sort of is. It sort of is.
I mean, I guess my thing is like that sound, unbelievable.
Yeah,
but there are songs on this album where like the unbelievableness of that sound I have that same feeling through the entire song. You know what I mean, Darren? At all?
I do. Only Shallow is not number one for me.
Oh God, I thought everybody would.
But I mean, I agree with what you're saying, Dan. And you know, if our listeners would recall on our list of the most important Nirvana songs, I think I may have been the only one who listed "Smells Like Teen Spirit" amongst the most important.
No, I
songs.
did it too because
Did
I
you?
said that. Yeah, and I did it before you. Which means I put it lower.
Right,
Now that I think about it.
exactly.
Right.
But anyway, like, you know, Gabe, I think you're taking for granted, like, how, you know, what this song sort of introduces you to, and like the sound, like the way, you know, Dan describes it, like this is shoegaze, like its importance, and like maybe after so much listening, it suddenly sounds ordinary when compared to some of the more complex textures that are explored later on in the record. But I still think that what is achieved here has never been achieved again by any other band. I feel like they sort of established something that, number one, could not really be topped, and, you know, number two, couldn't really even be copied in a lot of ways. I mean, yes, that incredible sound, whatever he did is a master stroke, but you know, I don't think that is the only great thing about this song. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's definitely not. And I remember feeling like when I was first listening to this album, just being like, you know, the even the verses taking my breath away, because it really it is like almost the perfect opening song. It just grabs you completely. But it's just weird because I just don't feel anymore like much for the verses. You know, they're like good the way that the verses of "When You Sleep" are good, or the verses of you know, whatever I Only Said are good, or, you know, like it feels like very much of a piece with a lot of these songs, and it's like the thing that makes it stand out is the hook and that sound. But it's just like, I don't know. I feel like I put it at number 4 because of its historical importance. If it just didn't have like all of that, and I almost wondered, like, should I not take that into account? I mean, if you're ranking the songs individually, like, who cares that it opens the album perfectly, you know?
Yeah,
but like,
true.
I couldn't not like give it a bump for just how like significant and earth shattering it feels. But you know, as a song, I just feel like it's maybe I don't know, overplayed for me personally. And there are other songs that I feel like I could listen to again and again. So that's my number 4. Dan, I believe you said your number 3.
Yeah, I think I've said the rest of mine, actually. My number 3 is When You Sleep.
Okay. All right. So Darren, your number 3.
My number 3 is I Only Said, which we talked about.
Okay. Yep. Okay. So my number 3 is Loomer, which I just, you know, I think this is weird, right? Putting it above Only Shallow. I recognize that.
Yeah.
But
After we talked
like
so much about how Loomer is a great follow-up track to Only Shallow.
I mean, it flows well. It
Yeah.
flows wonderfully. But for me, it just feels like it's like the hidden gem on this album, Loomer, which is like the one that's like easy to overlook. And it's just actually, I don't know, just for me personally, it's like hearing the like textures of these guitars and stuff is just like, this is a track where it's like the whole song, I'm as transfixed as I am during the hook of Only Shallow. You know, like that's how I think inventive like the entire track is, and it just sustains that. And it's just a short, like sustaining a single kind of sound, but it's just like, I think a really unsung hero of this album. So Dan, you're number 2.
Yeah, my number 2, I Only Said.
I mean, why? Why is it so high? Is it that meditative quality? I think you already said your piece.
Yeah, I got mad at you whenever, I forget what you had it at, but way too low. Yeah, I mean, I love that meditative, quality of it. I'm just repeating myself at this point, but I love that like chorus, whatever, sing along guitar. So I'm not even 100% sure what it is. I mean, this is just a fantastic song.
All right. Well, we are on to your number 2, Darren.
My number 2 is Only Shallow.
Okay. And you got anything to add on that one?
I do think that I took into account sort of my initial impression. Like when I first heard this song, I really felt like it was important. I honestly, I'm not going to lie, I did have it lower on my list when I first started doing this.
Chickened out.
Yeah, I did. I mean, I felt guilty. I was like, how could I do this, you know? And for anybody who's listening who's never heard this record or, you know, shoegaze, like, look no further than Only Shallow. Like, I mean, that is the entry song, not because it's just so accessible, but it sort of like so quickly introduces you and gets right to the point. Like, this is what it is. And if you don't like it, if you're finding yourself turning it off, then you're probably not going to find anything to like here. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I agree.
All right. Well, my number 2, we talked about a long ass time ago, but it's Sometimes, which I think is, again, I already said my piece, but it's just an absolute masterpiece, like breathtaking. Your number 1, Dan.
Yeah, Only Shallow. I'm the only patrician. And
the only not shallow listener.
Yeah, exactly.
Gabe, I think we have the same one.
My man.
Wow.
Can you believe how low Dan had this shit?
I can't even remember which one it is, honestly.
To Hear Knows When.
Yeah. The obvious number 1. I mean, this one.
Yes,
this
for
one was
fuck's
number
sake.
1. This was. I never changed this one.
I had a number 9.
Number 9.
Yeah.
Number 9.
I cannot believe that shit. I mean, to me, this is like their crowning achievement, pretty much. It's like, it's just so, you know, it's the track that is the most layered to the point where like it's just one sound, pretty much. And yet you can listen. There's so much to listen to. It's like Loomer times 1,000, where there's like so many textures and like just guitars bending and warping and like mixing in with each other, phasing in and out of time with each other. Like, there's so much to listen to. It's like swallowing the percussion, like even the tambourine. You know, if you've ever like been in a band, you know, the tambourine, like it cuts through fucking everything. It sounds loud as hell no matter how loud the music is you're playing. It's even drowning out like the tambourine at points, which gives it like a Sister Ray quality for me, which I just love.
Yes.
But it's like absolute amplifier worship, but like taken to another level where it just sounds like an absolute like just cloud of noise or something. Like, it sounds so ethereal, so like soft, and just, you know, this is like the epitome of like so harsh that it's, you know, it's soft. It's a phenomenal thing to hear. You know what I mean, Darren?
Absolutely. I think this is one of the tracks that very early on convinced me that this was, you know, unlike anything I'd ever really heard of before. You know, I think Only Shallow has that quality during that crazy sound part, but I feel like the entire track here, To Hear Knows When, is mind-blowing. And for all the things that Dan sort of criticized it for, being like just too noisy and everything, I just feel like there's this like incredibly controlling hand over the entire piece that is like carefully allowing it to, you know, envelop the entire song, you know, all the other instruments, and then come back down. And like, you know, I think the genius of it is like when you can create such chaos, but yet like control it, or like have some sort of, you know, power over it, where it's just, you can use it at your will, you know what I mean? And make it into something absolutely gorgeous, while also just, you know, giving you this sense of like total chaos. But like, to me, I'm listening to this, every time I listen to it, I am, you know, totally immersed in this like wall of sound. There are times where I repeat this track like over and over again, not even ready to move on, because you don't really quite get to this point, to this height, anywhere else on the record.
Yeah, you don't. I mean, it's like the most layered. It feels like the most labored over, because it sounds like it's bursting at the seams. Like, there are points where it's like about to fall apart and just become noise, and it like always kind of like oozes back, you know. It's like these like blooming sounds that are sometimes like getting out of control and then just coming back in the nick of time, you know. It's like, and like the way those like little fluty kind of synth loops like are interweaving with each other, it's like positively symphonic. There's just like so much. I mean, I just feel like this is their, you know, this is like their Good Vibrations, or like their Day in the Life or something. Like, that's just how I
think it's the album
song.
cover. Like, it's whenever you see the album cover, like that's what's kind of like happening. You know what I mean? Like the visuals. I think there's like this almost like ecstasy like feeling that I feel like, you know, most of the album is trying to get back to that, or trying to achieve that. Like, that's the whole point of this, but only this song seems to really capture it. You know what I mean? It's kind of hard to describe.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it feels like, the way that all of the Beach Boys smile is like trying to do good vibrations, but only good vibrations like really, really does it, even though there's a bunch of masterpieces there and the whole thing is amazing. Like, that's how I feel about this song. Like, this is the one that is like what he was after. It's like the one where exactly what was in his mind, I feel like we got. You brought up something I wanted to ask. I have a bunch of like assorted questions and stuff that I want to touch on, even though we sort of got to a lot of them already. But Dan, like, how important is this iconic cover to this album? And on top of that, we didn't say much about lyrics because they are pretty hard to understand. It's kind of clear that they're all like about sex in a way, like you can pick up that much that like it's about fucking most of the time, but in like kind of a artful, like gentle way. But the song titles, I think, add like a ton to the experience of the album. But like, how important is that kind of peripheral stuff to the experience of this thing?
I mean, this album cover is like one of the like most perfectly chosen record covers. It's like exactly what you get with this record. You can look at it, you could tell that it's a guitar, but it's like buried in this haze
out of focus,
of yeah, it's out of focus. It's buried in this haze of like these like reddish pink hues and everything, and that's basically exactly what the music is. Like you can tell there's a guitar involved, but that's sort of it. Everything's like so buried and obscured. And I think the album or the song titles, it's, like you said, you can basically not understand the lyrics here. Sort of by design, Kevin's like refused to like tell what the lyrics are and stuff. Personally, I think he probably just doesn't actually know or something. But so like these album or the song titles are sort of like the one hint you get every track. But even they are like so vague, like vague, the music. Yeah. I mean, is there a more vague title than Sometimes?
I know. But
I don't know what the fuck a loomer is.
I only said like
soon.
Said what?
But it's amazing like how evocative the titles kind of are, because
like what you want, like
they are so vague, but they just feel like the rush of that song, What You Want, like the way it's like completely driving, like just an absolute burst of energy, the most abrasive, the most like punkish track, like just calling it What You Want. I mean, it just feels like that's what it is. Or like Blown a Wish, it sounds like a wish was blown on that song. Like that's what that literally sounds like. I mean, it's just incredible, like how that just they knock it out of the park on that peripheral stuff. I mean, doesn't it feel like, Darren, like that kind of elevates this whole thing? Like it would have already been a masterpiece, but like without that cover art, without these song titles, it just doesn't complete the whole package.
I couldn't agree more. I think that the music, like I had mentioned, is so evocative of the album art. But then just looking at the album art without the music on, you can hear the sounds that of the record just by looking at the album art. You know what I mean? Like so they so perfectly like harmonize with each other in a way. And I never really gave too much thought to the song titles, but I definitely see your point in how they just add another little element of mystery, mystique to the songs themselves. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, for fun, I wrote down here, on Rate Your Music, if you pay like $5 a year, which I did because I'm a geek, you can look at like some extra stuff, including like individual track rankings or ratings rather. And so I sort of made a ranking, even though a bunch of these are tied, but I just kind of gave the one with more votes, the higher ranking. This is like one of the only non-bolded song is Touched, and there are like very few albums on Rate Your Music where like every song is bolded. But Darren, could you read the consensus rankings, what we just did, but consensus of all the songs on this album?
Yes, so at number 11, to no one's surprise, Touched. Number 10, What You Want. Number 9, Blown a Wish. Number 8, Loomer. Number 7, Come In Alone. Number 6, I Only Said. Number 5, To Hear Knows When. I mean, just. Number 4, Soon. Number 3, Sometimes. Number 2, When You Sleep. And number 1, just like Dan, Only Shallow.
Oh yeah, I had 3 of them the same. So
Really?
Yeah,
So
I'm the fan favorite here.
Yeah, any like big surprises here looking at the consensus rankings?
No, honestly not. I mean, I had 3 that are exactly the same, and then most of them are kind of close. Blown a Wish is a little bit different for me, and that's kind of it. They're all like within 3 spots from my personal list.
I think I only said is, kind of a bit of a surprise being that low. Soon being at number 4.
Yeah.
I'm a little surprised by. To Hear Knows When, I think is just egregious.
But I mean, like, I understand because that one's actually quite challenging. Like, it's so, hazy that it's like, it feels so distant that I understand why it's not as catchy as When You Sleep or, Soon or something like that.
You have to be a true patrician to appreciate it.
Yes, you really, really do. God damn, number 9 is what Dan had. Number 9. One question I had, so I want to ask sort of about like just, we talked about it plenty, like the flow of the album, how well it flows, but do you feel at all like it's a little top heavy? Doesn't it feel like it really comes out like guns blazing? And you kind of mentioned this, Darren, that you feel like toward the end, maybe it gets, you get kind of settled or something.
Yeah, because it almost it's like there's like a peak in the middle of the album for me, and that sort of ends with, I feel like, Come In Alone, and there's just kind of like, it kind of just goes down, not downhill like in quality or anything, but there's definitely a notable shift by the time you get to Blown a Wish, and you don't really come back to that sort of super guitar heavy, guitar, amplifier loving, whatever that you described it. That kind of goes away a bit. I mean, it kind of comes back in Soon, I suppose, but yeah, there's definitely a notable shift, and it's something I've always like noticed about the record. I think early on when I was like really digging it and loving it, the last 3 tracks just really weren't my favorite because that shift was just not. I always wanted to go back and start over again a little bit sooner. I grew to obviously love and appreciate those tracks quite a bit, but I imagine that might happen to first time listeners as well, where when they hear Only Shallow and then get to that sort of midsection where, When You Sleep, I Only Said and Come In Alone, maybe they're not prepared for like something like Sometimes, where it doesn't really, you kind of feel like it's a notable shift, right?
I guess for me, I feel like it's not so much top heavy as like the middle stretch. When You Sleep, I Only Said, and Come In Alone are like the same song. Like, they're all great, but it's like
it's fair. They all kind of flow into each other. Yeah, yeah.
The same drive, like the same kind of like structure, exactly. Like
sure,
the same kind of arrangement. It's like those 3 right in a row. It kind of makes it like, I don't know. It just does something to the flow of the album that's maybe not like ideal, and yet I don't know what I would change. What do you think about that, Dan?
I mean, I kind of don't agree. I think that this record is like such a solid album. Like I said earlier. It's a piece of a solid piece of art that just happens to be split into 11 tracks or whatever. So I never. There's no moment in the record I feel like we're dragging a little bit here or anything. It's only like 48 minutes long in total. I don't think it's top heavy, bottom heavy, middle heavy. I think it's like pretty well.
It's just heavy.
Yeah, that was good. I mean, I think like this record is like damn near perfectly sequenced. I've never thought like, I like the first part more or anything. Not at all.
All right, here's another question. I'm like we talked about a lot of this stuff, like what makes it a masterpiece. But one question I have is like, are these great pop songs? If you like stripped away the production choices, the textures, are they just like at the core, like just very catchy, great songs? Or is that kind of missing the point of this album? Like they're you know what I'm saying? Like they're not like as fully developed songwriting wise because the texture and all that stuff is really at the fore of the album. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, I think like Darren hinted at it earlier, but like these are like it's like a perfectly deconstructed like pop record, you know? Like you could tell like under this murk and everything, like it is just sort of a normal, you know, rock song, or, you know, pop rock song. But these choices of production like are what elevates it and what like deconstructs it. You know, you're using the you know, you're using the tools of pop music or whatever, but you're changing it to a point where it becomes interesting again, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I like that. Like, most of the instruments that are used on this record are the same instruments, obviously, that are used like on Nevermind. You know what I mean? A guitar, a drum,
yeah, exactly,
and a
right,
bass. I mean, it's all there. It's just how you are manipulating that. When you played these two records side by side, they're you know, you obviously can recognize similarities, but I mean, they're also like worlds apart. You know what I mean? There's not like this Kurt Cobain voice cutting through
right
on this record, and that's why I still feel like the vocal choice is so, you know, critical to this sound and kind of making it its own and you know, establishing it in such a way that like it can't really be topped, can hardly be copied. You know, sure, you could strip away, you could probably change it and make it into something that's much more like simpler, and you could probably add a, you know, an Eddie Vedder type of voice to it, and suddenly you've got an alt rock jam, right? That's what the copycats do, right? They take parts of that and they turn it into something that's more consumable for mainstream audiences. This is not intending to do that. You know what I mean? When you are mumbling lyrics at such a low, like a whisper, you're not hoping that, you know, it's going to get played on the radio and people are going to want to sing along. You know, like that's not the intent.
Yeah, I just like, I think it's very interesting that if you know, because basically you could play like any song on Nevermind on an acoustic guitar, and it would, you know, maybe you lose some things from some songs, but for the most part, they're just like such well-written songs, or like, you know, John Lennon level songwriting is down in there. Here, there are a couple songs you could do that. Like I could imagine, you know, like When You Sleep, like on an acoustic guitar, you know, you like just whistle like the do 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 do, and then you're like, when I look at you, oh do 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 do, you know. But there are other songs like imagine an acoustic like Only Shallow, you know, you just be like, yeah, and then or like, you know, just acoustic like To Hear Knows When or something. It would be the most boring, like just playing out like at a campfire or something. Everybody would be looking at you like, what the you're just playing the same fucking chord for so long and just saying ooh over and over again, you know. It's not a song. So it's like interesting how some of these songs, they just kind of like make up for the, like they emphasize the texture and the sound much more than the songwriting. Like the songwriting is just like sort of this loose structure to kind of actually just give you the sounds, which I think is like kind of an incredible, like the most incredible part about this album. And yet, is it possible, you know, we talked about this, I think when we talked about Nirvana, where it's like, did Nirvana do more harm than good as far as their influence goes? You know, did this album is often called one of the most influential albums ever. You know, is it possible that it taught like a whole generation that you can make up for poor songwriting with texture, and that maybe that's been sort of detrimental?
I mean, maybe. I mean, that's hard to say. I mean, I don't think like just because you've written a simple song, but then, you know, the production is what makes it great, and the effects and stuff. I mean, I like listening to experimental music and stuff because I like to hear like sounds that I'm not familiar with, or I don't know how they're made or whatever. And I mean, you know, I don't listen to Autechre because they write a goddamn, you know, good pop hook. You know, I listen to it for a different reason, and I feel like My Bloody Valentine is sort of the bridge between those two worlds. You know, it's still got one foot in the, you know, Nirvana, you know, regular music, but it's also, you know, stretching its legs into this experimental, like, you know, sound, you know, world. And I don't see any problem with that. I mean, sure, was somebody inspired by this and they made a shitty album? Like, I guarantee it. But I mean, I'm sure somebody was inspired by Def Leppard and made a great record. You know, I feel like that's sort of a shitty thing. You know.
Yeah. For one example is My Bloody Valentine on the song Coming Along. But
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and actually, I was also going to ask, you know, like, does it feel like another part of this album's legacy, Darren, maybe you can tackle this, is like, it's kind of like the album that leads you into more experimental pastures, you know, because it almost is like that. It's like a gateway album, I feel, where it's like, most people are hearing this the first time they're hearing it, because it's so famous. Like, you probably have never heard anything like so experimental, you know, but after this, it kind of opens your eyes to noise, to texture-based music, you know, like it takes you there. I feel like, because in talking about like why is this album's legacy the way it is, like it's almost like you're gonna get here, and from here on nothing's ever gonna be the same, and it'll always have that position. You know what I mean, Darren?
Yeah, I do, and I think this ties right into, you know, your sort of commentary on the songwriting being somewhat loose, you know, not necessarily like a Paul McCartney-esque type of song structure, you know what I mean? Right. And it helps, and I'm certain that it helped me sort of appreciate that, you know, I don't need you know, my favorite bands or songwriters don't necessarily have to be of the quality of like Paul McCartney and John Lennon, you know, like it's really great to kind of stretch that out so far that like I'm not even thinking of that sort of influence when I'm listening to this. You know, I'm much more invested in how are they making the sound? Like, how are they doing this?
Yeah.
Like, how I'm thinking about the studio and what kind of process like Kevin Shields is going through to like make this happen. And by the end of it, once you've like completely consumed this record, you know, you're kind of like begging for more. And I think it does make it very easy to expand out. And now you're looking at things that have no singing whatsoever, and you don't even care because like you want to hear more of like that experimental sound sort of stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah, because you're like, you know, I feel like another thing that's really great about this album is it gives you those hooks, you know, but those like kind of lead you in, you know, it's like
right
when you listen to I Only Said or whatever, you know, it's like the first thing your ear attaches to is that like and then from there you're like start to notice the rhythm guitar, which is actually like the much cooler part of the song. It's like you actually get interested in the textures of the song more than the actual hook.
Can you throw some respect on the hook, though? I mean, come on, Gabe. Like, it's not like that's not how it goes, man.
That is how it goes.
It's more like
that's a note for note.
You know, it's got some.
It is way cooler than Gabe.
Yeah.
Wow,
you
totally
spent this whole podcast shitting on this hook.
I feel like you're just taking shots at some of these songs.
I really didn't like mean to shit on this one. I was just saying that like it's not. I guess you guys just simply can't understand, but it's like not catchy. It's not like I could imagine like you know, I don't know, Selena Gomez coming out with a song that's like, you know, samples the hook from When You Sleep or something like
wow.
that. Do, but like she's never coming out with a song. It's like ooh 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 ooh. You know, it's like it's catchy in like a trance-inducing way, less of a pop way. Anyway, my point is, Dan, do you feel like that's kind of the place it holds for you, and that's like what makes this the masterpiece it is? That it is that gateway album that like, you know, it just makes you, it just takes you. Opens your eyes to like texture-based music and everything, like I was saying.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is the perfect gateway into, you know, especially noisier stuff, because like you said, you know, those little hooks and all, they're like little anchor points. You know, you can listen to this and you're not in a completely different world. You know, you're just in like a familiar but slightly different kind of world, and then you get more into it, and I think the more you listen to it, the more normal it becomes, and then you can move on to like really noisy stuff like Earth, Sun, Boris, sure. or even just like noise rock. I mean, I think like enjoying this record could get you into Lightning Bolt or something, even though it's pretty different. I think it's a good doorway into this noisier world that exists.
It just almost like frees you to go anywhere, because it's just like, oh, it's like the I mean, what makes like Animal Collective great is like not really the it's not really like the songwriting. They're not like Lennon McCartney or anything. It's like the creativity with the music.
Exactly.
The sound worlds they create. It could lead you there. It could lead you to Autechre. It could lead you to like even just like kind of off-kilter rock or something. Like some,
Big Black or something.
Yeah. I mean, it could just lead you anywhere, and it's just like because of what it emphasizes, I think, is what makes this like such a legendary album. But all right, I mean, any last closing thoughts here? We somehow successfully ranked all the songs on basically a perfect album.
Yeah, that was honestly a really stupid idea.
Yeah, I'm pretty mad that we had to put ourselves through that.
Yeah.
Of all the records we've ever ranked, this was by far the most difficult, I would say.
Oh, I completely agree. Oh, every other record we've ranked, I've had a pretty good list, within the first couple days of us, working on this. This one, I was working on it to the wire. I don't think I had a complete solid list until hour or two before we recorded.
Yeah, let me challenge our listeners. If you can think of an album that you think would be even harder to rank, email us and let us know, because I think it would actually be a fun challenge.
Yeah,
maybe. All right, well, what do you think? We'd love to read your thoughts on the air. That email address is popshieldpod@gmail.com. As always, next episode in 2 weeks, and we are not sure what it is. So make sure you like the show, help us out by subscribing, leave us a 5-star review wherever you get your podcast. Stay connected: Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and I'll post on there. When we decide what the next episode is. All that stuff is at Pop Shield, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.
See ya.
So long.